Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us who like our spiritually with a twist. So we are working on one of our little series at GNT. We like our series,
We do. We like them.
and we're doing Jung's answer to Job. And we got to, like, you might say, the climax point of this whole thing,
Ooh,
if one could say,
ooh, ooh, ooh.
about Jesus. Some people
That
would
is
say, "Oh God," at the climax point. Okay, so we're going to Jesus, and we wanted to, like, talk about what Jung thought about Christianity, and we thought we'd do the more difficult part worse, which the more difficult part first, which is where he saw the problems with Christianity. So this is our second part of this episode. The first part took an interesting twist. Daniel was just saying, "Don't take this episode too much off the rails," but it's going to go off the rails immediately. No, Daniel did a great thing last time, which was he described the Enlightenment state, right? And described it in context of, like, this is how he sees Jesus. At the end of this whole long description, I couldn't help but chuckle because I was like, yeah, that's our Jesus.
right.
That's our guy. It's not my uncle, Pete's Jesus
No, it's not.
or the neighbor's Jesus, but that's our Jesus. And then, like, took the episode in this place of, like, talking about finding your version of the spiritual figures that speak to you, right?
Yes. Yep.
Or maybe creating your own, maybe it's
Yeah.
like that, right? And I have to say, Daniel, that at the end of, that day, I was talking about Buddha and the whole idea, like, I like a tantric Buddha. I'm just into that kind of Buddha.
Sure.
I don't want, like, an ascetic Buddha.
You want the
I like
saucy
more of,
one.
I like a saucy Buddha. I like a little bit of a frisky Buddha. No, like, we've talked about it before, but there's a great line in one of the Buddhist stories where, the king asks Buddha, like, how does it go again? Oh, in this rose apple garden so full of delights, if I would have to, like, give up the sense pleasures to experience enlightenment, that I could never do Gautama or something. I'm
Yeah,
paraphrasing.
yeah, yeah. He wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't. The king is like, no, I'm not going to do it. But he was like, oh, that's how it is. And then he teaches him all the tantras, right? That's one of the tantric backstories. So
Yeah.
we were talking about that, and I thought, okay, so I mean, there's Jesus's like that too. So I went and I looked, and I pulled up the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which I
Okay.
think we can do an episode on, right?
Yeah,
As
we
a
should for sure.
follow up. And in that episode, the passage is kind of missing a little bit, but, like, there's no doubt that Mary Magdalene and Jesus kiss
Oh,
in this thing, and they're some kind of partners. They're some kind of spiritual partners. And my mom loves this book. I don't know why. She's not Christian at all, but she thinks this is so great. She just
yeah.
loves this thing. And so I went and I found, like, a translation of the episode by the exact guy I brought up in the podcast, this Robert Price, this biblical scholar. I was like, I didn't even know he did this.
Huh.
And I've had some luck with sort of, like, finding spiritual materials lately. I had, like, a very deep soul connection with someone. I think we have a deep soul to soul connection.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the spiritual things start popping out all over the place,
Mm,
very conveniently. So yeah, so I found it. So I'll go through and I'll do that. But I was just thinking, yeah, that's the kind of, like, you can find your Jesus that you like.
right.
Was the Christmas theme of the episode in the end.
That's right.
Do you have anything else you want to say about with that? I don't know. It seems like Schroeder should be playing the piano. Da, 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 da. Then Jesus and Mary Magdalene are making out. I don't know. You got anything more on that one? I just wanted to bring it up because I wanted to propose the episode to you and just kind of talk about that little piece.
No, no, I mean, I think everything I said pretty much felt good when I was saying it last time. I definitely,
Yeah.
for those who didn't see it, that episode, I think I titled it "Not Enough Jesuses." So, feel free to check that one out if you haven't yet. But yeah, I was very, I don't know, I was very proud of that because I feel like we don't always get a chance in a little bit of a longer form opportunity to express how it is that we're feeling with things that have deep meaning but don't always come up in conversation, and to be listened to and inquired about how we feel about these kinds of things has a large value. So it had value in the moment for expressing it, but then it also has had value all week as I have talked to other people about it, and it's nice that I was talking with the patient and they were mentioning how a friend of theirs was born Catholic, married a Jewish guy, and their daughter is about to get bat mitzvahed, and the parents were like, "Well, if you do that, we're not going to speak to you anymore."
Mm.
And so the parents are sort of kept outside of the religious practices of the family, and they're kind of on the outside, and and they're doing the bat mitzvah thing, which is kind of like confirmation, like we talked about last week. And I told my patient, I said, well, what's funny about this is that neither party, husband, wife, or parents, are practicing their own practice that deeply, anyways. You know,
Oh,
like
none
it's,
of them really like are serious in the Christianity or the Judaism that serious about
in my opinion, we don't do hot takes too much, but in my opinion,
it.
if you're really practicing what it is that you claim to practice, you will have overcome the ignorant and small-minded divisions between you and other people, especially ones of your kin,
Mm.
and to choose um, separation over love shows your lack of practice and lack of desire to overcome that small perceived separation, which means to me, you are not practicing.
William Blake says something about like if your desire is able to be those whose desires are able to be are able to be overcome didn't have that strong of a desire in the first place, something like that,
There you
right?
go.
Yeah, it's like weird on that because it does fit into what we've been talking about. I with the kids I watched during the past week, my daughter's back from France, and we watched Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, or whatever this thing is. I think it's based on this old Judy Blume book. I don't know if you know this movie or that came
Nah,
out. Well, it's weird because the story is exactly what you're talking about. It's a Jewish man who marries the Christian woman. The daughter is the main character. That's Margaret, I think, is the name of the character. And the whole family shatters over this.
yeah.
The grandparents on the mom side, the Christian side, like disown their daughter, basically say we're never going to talk to you again over this. And then I think on the other side of the family, the Jewish mom is very kind of there all the time, kind of hoping that she's going to entice her into Judaism. But the daughter's kind of allowed to make her own choice. And it was funny. I didn't expect it to be that deep of a movie, but I gave part of it away. But I mean, I think you would just get that in the general description. And it's
Yeah.
maybe if this question speaks to you, if you're watching and like, you're like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, it was a lot deeper than I thought. I thought it was just gonna be like a coming of age story, about this girl, but it got to this place where they were asking that exact question. I'm looking at the behavior of the adults, and they're not able to solve their problems, right?
Right.
Yeah. Um. Well, I guess that gets us into like you. Good. Should I move into the?
Let's do it.
Daniel and I had a conversation beforehand. Like, let's get this episode started. Let's not have like a 15-minute like rambling conversation. Let's get the episode in. So, anyways, I know how long this was, but we'll
About
see.
10 minutes.
Failed anyways. Missed again. No, that was worthwhile talking about. That shit's
Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So, okay. So the point of this episode, I guess, is about an observation that Jung makes, which I think is, or what seems to be a theme throughout his work, observations and themes that are like, seem kind of prophetic to me,
Yeah.
which is, he basically says, and I think it's partially his experience from his own life, where he grew up in this religious family. When he started questioning his father about things, he realized his father really didn't have any answers, and was just basically saying, okay, you just got to take all these things on faith, I suppose. But he also really suspected that his father didn't really have that faith anymore, even though his father was a pastor.
Right.
Jung definitely had the sense of like, no, he doesn't believe in what he's doing, not really, and he's
Huh.
trying to make himself believe in it, but he doesn't. And I think as Jung matured, he started to look at like, okay, is this myth of this culture still serving me? We talked about that, and he decided that that wasn't the case. But I think as he got to the end of his life, he started writing some pretty, even more strikingly honest things to my eyes. And he started really talking about the idea that if the myth doesn't serve the culture anymore, it's going to break, you know?
Hmm.
And the problem with this myth is it's so much based on a kind of a faith that it can't stand up anymore. It's like too old in a way, right? It
Yes.
needs to evolve, and people aren't letting it evolve. It's like stuck. So the people who are maybe the truest people who are, the true believers, but they're kind of in an older version of this that won't move forward. And then I think he does think that this is going to create a kind of an atheism
Mm.
and the culture will kind of split. So I don't know. You have initial reactions on that. I'll talk about Kierkegaard for a second, but I should throw it out to you to see. I mean, what do you think of that whole set of ideas? I think that seems true to me.
I
That
think,
that's what
when we
happened.
were talking about it last week, or last time, I think you put it in a slightly different way. I think that you said that it causes a duality,
Yeah, I think that's true.
right? And I think then you said that some of that duality, if I'm remembering right, will be filled with materialism.
Well, I think it was materialism and also like probably atheism, both. I think Jung is saying, yeah, I guess those are two different points.
Okay.
Probably both true, right? When you say materialism, are you looking at it more like not materialism, like a belief that there's just the material aspects of the universe?
I
You mean
mean, for
materialism in
me,
like consumptionism? You mean that too, right?
both,
Yeah,
both.
I think that's true. I think both of those things. Yeah.
Both. So then for people, just to kind of make sure that because I'm pulling my thoughts in and I want to make sure everybody's with us. The split, at least in my mind, is that the sort of myth of divinity, we're going to call it that, in the culture, in this culture or in any culture, eventually will fade based on people's lack of practice or internal desire to do so or presence, however, and then that will lead to like a rift in things, in the myth itself, and then within the culture. And then this sort of materialism will fill the void, if you will. And that materialism, and I mean, when I say materialism, I mean biological materialism. So the idea that we are only matter, and matter is here. Then when the lights go out, matter dissolves and goes back into the ground, and then more happen, and that's the end of that. That is one. And then the other part that came to me last time, and that's why I wanted to show it for this conversation, I also think consumerism, a different form of materialism, fills that void, especially in the industrialized world. And I say this because I have some, friends who have been on the podcast before, Remy and Ashley, and Remy, whom we've been on before. They have their center in,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Mexico, Cumancaya, has said that he has some people whom he knows that are down in Mexico, don't have a lot of money, live in these very small places, and are week to week, basically, right, with their working. And they don't have a lot, but the one thing many of them have is a huge television. And he's like, it's totally backwards. It's totally backwards. You
That
know,
wasn't where I expected that story to go. I thought it was going to be, but they have the simple faith of their culture. I thought I was going to go to that place.
no,
Not like that. They have a huge interfaith. Instead, it went, they have a huge widescreen, big ass TV. I wasn't
right,
expecting that twist.
right.
Okay.
And that, so I can't say for sure if that's taken the place of their, Mayan roots or whatnot, but it is present, and more people than not in the world, I think, wouldn't mind having more things. Obviously, that means more niceties in their life, but for me, I don't know how. There was somebody who I like, who, and I forget, Naval Ravikant, who is a millionaire and has his own podcast and has been on a couple different shows. And he said he's a wise person, made money in life, and says, of course I'm chasing enlightenment, but I'd rather do it in a private jet. And for me, those things sit in juxtaposition to each other. Because if you're spending your time making money in order to be able to afford a private jet, then I don't know how you're going to have the time to chase enlightenment, if we even can call it a chase. Do you know what I'm saying? So this idea of a split leaves a void, and the void then is, for me, is means of self-soothing, or some kind of like mental habit of desire. Robert Thurman will say that when you see commercials and things that you are shown to you, you're meditating on desire. And so for me, that desire fills the need for fulfillment or closeness to something, gives you a little pop. And that's why I use that term materialism, all of that, to say that.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you were talking about your experiences with the episodes, different having conversations with people after the last one.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a patient today about the last one that was I think the one before that, referencing wisdom and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And she had listened to this one, and she said she sent it on to a bunch of people because she thought it was like a really important conversation. I was like, oh, that's great,
Yeah.
as we say. And then I started telling her about the one that we recorded. That's the one that's going to be not enough Jesuses. Is that what it is?
Yes, that's right.
And I started, and she was like, "Oh, I can't wait to listen to that one." And it was hard because you have honest conversations with people, honest conversations with patients. It was sort of like there throughout our entire interaction with one another. This point, which I made at the end, where I was like, "Okay, I know you run your own small business," and she felt a little uncomfortable with part of what was being said because I think she felt like the way our conversation was going, I think she thought one of the undercurrents of it was that she had concern with money. And at some point I said, no, you don't have concern with money. I know you don't. It's not the money. I was saying you have responsibility,
Right.
right, for running this business, and it eats up a lot of your time. I know that you just need enough money to let you have a vacation in the Caribbean occasionally.
Right.
And I was like, there's nothing wrong with that. You can enjoy your life. Um, so it was funny. We were talking about a similar set of issues, but not a jet.
Right.
You probably don't need your own jet. You could just get on like just buy a ticket and fly down there on nice commercial thing, you know. So I mean, I think she had that. She was trying to figure out that exact same question. Where's her line with that?
Yeah.
How much material stuff does she need? I think we were referencing the king earlier, King Indrabhuti, who talks with Buddha and basically said, no, like the people in my culture, like they want to enjoy their lives, but I also want to have them have the opportunity to be enlightened.
Right.
And so, I mean, the whole point of that tantric story is like, yeah, you can enjoy a life and experience things that are enjoyable, that in a bizarre way, what samsara has to offer, which is enjoyable.
Right.
Samsara being this Buddhist term for like the swirling waters of life that go all kinds of crazy, chaotic ways.
Yeah.
But, there's enjoyments to be had,
Of
within
course.
that. And I think that's been one of the themes of the show from the beginning. Like, how do you structure a life within the samsaric world
Yeah.
where you can like experience the pleasures of things that probably realistically people aren't going to give up. They're not going to give up the pleasures, that life has. But how do
No.
you transform those, tantra transforming
Yeah.
into experiences that are more building towards enlightenment? That's been like one of our projects, like from like episode 1 in this, right? And whether it's Lama Yeshe talking about this in his introduction to Tantra, which is kind of a great conversation about this. Yeah, you can enjoy things, right? You just have to be able to enjoy them in the context of them building towards your enlightenment. And
Yes.
that was the conversation I was having with my patient. I was just like, yeah, you can have a lot of things. You can have relationships with people that can be enjoyable. Hopefully, a lot of times they end up being a fucking misery. That
Depends on
seems
the relationship.
unnecessarily so, but we can be honest about it. But you can have relationships with people. You can have like kids, and kids can be wonderful, right?
Yeah.
I love the soulmate connections with my kids that we've talked about in the episodes. That could be very meaningful, but it's going to be driving towards this enlightenment.
Yeah.
So at the end of the conversation with the patient, I was kind of like, okay, I think the idea is that you can enjoy the world, but you have to have this underlying drive towards something deeper, you know? And then like I could say personally for me, that's like I want to be an enlightened person. I want to try to do this thing. What you were describing last week, if that's a thing,
Right.
I want to work towards that,
Right.
and that gives a meaning towards my life. And what hadn't occurred to me, Daniel, I was like, I said to the patient, I was like, that's my refuge in my life, the thing that
Sure.
gives hope. She brought the word hope, you know, people need hope. And she was talking about, I think, patients that she sees, you know, through, some of her spiritual practice. And I was like, yeah, well, my hope and refuge is to work towards this enlightenment. And that always is the thing that fills the space for me.
Yeah.
Even as life goes through its ups and downs, we all have maybe we have our heartbreaks and our moments of disappointment and so on, right? But the fact that there's this enlightenment thing always gives me this hope. And I hadn't thought about that, like that taking refuge in your own enlightenment idea.
Sure.
That sometimes they have in the tantras, that your own future enlightenment is your refuge.
Right.
That's what you're working towards.
That's a good thought.
Yeah. Um, okay, let me say something about Kierkegaard, I guess.
Sure.
I'll get your reaction and then we'll double it back if that's cool with you.
Yeah.
So, all right. So Jung obviously knew all these philosophers, And one of the philosophers that, he would have been familiar with definitely would have been Kierkegaard. Now, how many people know too much about Kierkegaard? Probably nobody, right? Unless you
Nobody.
really have an interest in this. So he's kind of a Danish philosopher. I've been to Copenhagen now. There's kind of statues and streets named after him over there. It's kind of an interesting thing. You know, when you know someone like that, you're like, oh, he's everywhere here. If you want to boil down what he was trying to say, on at least part of what he's trying to say, is that part of the reason that he believes in Christianity is because it's impossible to believe in. There's a kind of an absurdity to it. But he
Mm,
says that's the power of it, you know, paradoxically,
right.
for him
Okay.
as a Christian person. So he'd be like what you call a Christian existentialist. His attitude is, I choose to believe in this old myth, even though I know it doesn't make sense for me as a modern person to believe in it, because it's asking me to believe in things that I probably can't fully if I just trust my own reason. He's the person who actually coins the phrase leap of faith. It's him, it
Mm,
comes from him. And so he says, you make a leap of faith and you go and you say, okay, I'm going to believe that 2,000 years ago, some person was incarnated on the earth as a divinity and died for my sins. And, kind of a very conventional take on Christianity, not yours from last week.
right.
You know, and he says, like, it's really hard for a modern person to believe in that. But, that's what I'm going to do as this Christian existential person. I'm going to make that leap of faith and believe in this thing, like, despite its unbelievability, or maybe with its unbelievability being part of its power or something.
Sure.
So I just wanted to bring up the idea, because Jung definitely would have been familiar with this kind of willingness to make this leap of faith. But even when I was talking with my patient, I was like, it's hard for lots of people to do that. This is a
Right.
very rare kind of person who wants to take this attitude and do this thing. For the most part, I think that, like, it just doesn't become tenable anymore for people. And so then they're put into that what I actually have it in the notes, this pathological dualism.
Mm,
Like, you can't hold these two ideas in your head at the same time. It's like impossible, right?
right.
You can't like be a 21st century rationalist person and then, hold on to this idea that, a couple of thousand years ago, in like some country I probably had never been, from some books written from someone who never met this person, this thing happened. And I've watched people try to do this, but I think that's what Jung is pointing out. I wanted to bring the subject out because I'm really curious what you think about it. But I remember talking to one of the RNs I worked with,
Sure.
and she was saying, the reason I'm Christian, and she was like holding on to it like so desperately. The reason she was saying she was Christian in this much more orthodox way was because, Jesus came back from the dead. And I was like, okay. And I was never, I'm a polite person with people's spiritualities. We try to be polite here too. I would never say her, no, I'd say, okay, that's cool. I respect that, would be my answer. And yeah, we liked each other, and we had a good working relationship, and we're work friends and whatever. I would
Yeah.
never in any way say anything that would be disrespectful to her beliefs. But at the same time, of course, you're kind of thinking, okay, well, there's like tons of old stories. When we talk about last week, we were talking about, like, does Jesus exist or not exist? Is he a mythic character? We kind of brought that issue up, you know, wasn't expecting it, but it came up in the episode. And I thought that was cool to talk about too.
Right.
Right. And I was just like, there's tons of stories where people come up from back from the dead.
Sure. Yeah.
There's tons of other stories that are impressive. So to make your whole faith have to hinge upon this thing, it's going to be hard for your rational mind to do that. If you're a Kierkegaard person, you're saying, okay, fuck it, I'm doing this because it's a leap of faith.
Right.
I'm recognizing that this isn't a rational thing to believe. It's not going to satisfy my rationality.
Right.
That part of me, it's not going to satisfy. But his attitude is, okay, fuck it, I'm going to do it anyways, right?
Right.
Because that's part of the emotional power of it. The spiritual power is making that leap. Maybe you can do that, but I think for a lot of people, that's just not going to hold up, you know?
Mm.
And certainly when you start doing it en masse for like like the societal question of it, right? I think within the society, it's going to be really hard for that to hold up. But I wanted to just bring that question up and see what you thought about that. I know you have an opinion about the Kierkegaard thing at all, or what do you
I
think?
think no, it's a great point. And what do they say? One of the marks of intelligence is the ability to hold two dichotomous thoughts at the same time.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I find that to be, I find that statement to make faith more powerful, actually. you
Mhm.
know. So that's cool, just to see that in that way. I'm like, I'm enjoying that in my mind, that
It's
kind
like
of.
an interesting take on it. It's not something we talk about too much, you know?
No, it's
Not
it's
famous in the United States, obviously, and, a lot of people have never heard of him, but leap of
no,
faith,
but
you know?
it's kind of like a scientific or psychological or philosophical viewpoint on faith, which I don't know how many conversations on grand scale are being had about that, because usually when someone says they believe, the conversations kind of stop because people, I think, want to be polite or respectful, or there's not a lot of that kind of a thing, whereas like assuming you have quote unquote faith in whatever it is that you believe in, it's different, but it's the same kind of faith. You're believing something that you cannot put your hands around, you're believing in something that you feel. You're willing to take that, as you said, leap of faith. And so that part is interesting, and it's shared amongst many religions because they're all stories. They're based on stories of people who did amazing things, right? There was one that I found of a saint. I don't know what year it was, the 16 or 15. I don't know what hundreds it was. Saint Francis of Assisi, of
Oh, yeah,
Assisi. Yeah,
yeah.
he numerous reports he could fly
Yeah.
or at least jump and float. At a bare minimum, he got hang time.
If
And
you
he,
think about that, which is, I was talking with my patient about this, and I did say, Daniel loves these stories. Like, you'd love
yeah, yeah,
them.
yeah, it's super fun.
You love those stories. But for me, I'm like, well, whether that happened or not, I don't know. But I'm
Sure,
not going to hang my whole spirituality on whether
right.
some old Italian saint could fly. I'm not gonna, that's not going to be the basis of this, you know. And maybe that's like Lama Glenn can be amusing on this point. I know you have a softer spot for Carlos Castaneda than I do. I don't like dislike him, but I'm not like a
Yeah.
Carlos Castaneda person. But like he was talking about one of the I think it's a German guy. He was recommending a book to me, and he said this book is really hard to read. It's written by this German guy. And he said he read it when he was first becoming interested in like Tibetan Buddhism. But the guy's backstory was he was traveling in the Himalayas and he met like a guru, and he said like, oh, it's like Carlos Castaneda except it actually happened. And I was laughing because then of course there's the whole debate whether Castaneda any of that stuff really happened, and it
Right.
probably, but it doesn't mean his stories aren't inspiring for people if you like Castaneda,
Sure.
But those stories of cities that you brought up last time,
Yeah, powers. Yeah.
the powers, and that speaks to different people in different ways. But I don't
Yeah.
know. Again, it's like the RN. I don't know if I can hang my spiritual life on whether like 2,000 years ago some person flew or rose from the dead or something. It's pretty hard to do that.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on your personality type or something. But
I mean, to me, flying is more impressive, anyways. Just to be,
there's no stories of JC flying.
yeah, not a single one.
No,
But the
you have
Italian
the hang
priest,
time for it. The Italian
hey.
priest, hey, yeah, he pulled that off. But like, I mean, there's one of these mythicists guys, Mark Carrier, and I've tried to get through one of his books. I've listened to him lecture, because I'm open to these questions. I'm open to different points of view, and he's like,
Sure.
there's stories like this all over the place. Everybody's flying everywhere, so there's no reason to believe in that as opposed to some Indian guy
Right, 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 right.
flew or did whatever, walked on the water. Like, it's hard to say that that's if you think about it, the rational part of yourself. I mean, you could
Yeah.
obviously, okay, there's tons of stories. Why am I just believing this story? Why don't I believe the story about Krishna where he did all this cool shit?
Yeah.
Like it's hard for the rational part of the mind to hold those things. Though I get the Kierkegaard thing. I get the leap and faith stuff. I mean, I get that, why people do that.
Yes.
It gives it the power. Anyway, the other thing that occurred to me, I know it's something more you have on that one, or should I?
No.
The thing that occurred to me is like how this seems like this has unraveled. Because if Jung is being in part prophetic, and I think he is, the way this played out to me, if I was going to give like a history of the United States, and maybe it's different in other countries, and if we have our international listeners, they can say. But to me, I thought 9/11 was a big thing in the United States, and we both were affected in our own ways by that. You much
Yeah.
more so than me because you were in the military, right?
Yes.
That affected you real deep. I was like
Yeah.
observing from afar. But my feeling of the in the 9/11 world is that exploded atheism in the United States to a certain extent because it got to be this argument. This is like the Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris kind of atheism. If any of those names mean anything to you, if
Yeah,
you're like, I have no idea who any of those dudes are, absolutely fine too. It's what one of the things you realize in the modern world. There's these like bubbles of people, and if you haven't fallen into the bubble, you might never heard of these folks.
right.
There are all these famous atheists. And the way that seemed to me was that there was like this whole thing that happened where people said, okay, so the Twin Towers were hit and the fault is religion. And religion that is sort of has this I don't even know what the right word for it is. I guess you could say dogmatism, but I mean, I don't think it
Sure.
really captures it, you know. But it was this whole idea that no, the problem is religion, and people are holding these kind of naive religious
Right.
beliefs, and it needs to be replaced by a rationality that will solve everything. So my experience was that there was this huge push during that window of time. Does that make sense to you, Daniel?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was true. And there was this kind of like, yeah, again, there was this explosion, and I felt like it was kind of devastating in the aftermath. Because even though maybe those types of religiosities should be challenged, it left a kind of a vacuum.
Right.
And I suppose the vacuum continued to kind of grow, would be maybe how Jung would look at this, right?
It's
And what
still
I
growing.
think it's still growing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And probably there's been this incredible vacuum of like other disappointments. Obviously, 2008 and the financial crisis, like capitalism kind of crashed in people's eyes, right? And then I think in the United States, in this incredible vacuum, you get something like a Trumpism, even is probably part of that. Now, we don't talk about political stuff, but just looking at that as a movement, that's a vacuum filling movement in people's lives or something. All of a sudden, this savior figure of this big orange blob is going to appear,
Yeah.
right? And like solve all our problems. And I remember watching like when he won in 2016, people were like weeping, like this incredible thing had happened. And I remember thinking, okay, what emotional state do you have to be in to
Right.
think that this big orange con artist, slumlord, you know, charlatan is gonna like gonna solve all your problems. So you're like, that almost was like a religious response to that. Does that make sense to you too?
Yeah.
There was a religiosity behind that. And it's again, it's like gotten kind of extreme. And I guess on the other side, people have made the point, we don't do political stuff. But on the other point, a lot of this the social activism got a religious tone to it too. You know,
Sure.
even if the causes are good, it took on a tone of religiosity. And the argument goes, I think, from going back to Jung, that there was this vacuum that appeared, and people started like kind of just grasping around to fill that spiritual gap or something.
Mm.
I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there's something to that? I mean, this is like, I'm not the first person to make this point, but I think it
Yeah,
does
I think
fit in the context of recent American culture. Yeah.
yeah, people are looking, like I said earlier, and I use materialism, as that, but people like community. They like to be part of something in addition to the community, just people around you, but they like to have ideals, things that are greater than them to work on, work with, work for, work towards, you know, and the on both sides of the aisle, actually, over the last, probably 10 years or so, has definitely been filling that void for lots of people, including the rise of like the conspiracy stuff, right? Flat
Yeah.
Earth people and all the
QAnon
other,
types and all that stuff. Yeah.
and like, yeah, some of it is true. Yeah, that happens. Someone said, oh, hey, there's a sex island that celebrities go to. We're like, yeah, sure, there's a sex. Oh, actually, no, there is totally a sex island that people go to. Somebody, whatever.
There's a former president who's been down there 27 times. I think someone was telling me in the past week. I was like, 27 times.
Yeah,
Hmm.
okay.
I
Well,
had no idea what was
they
going on.
have really good sandwiches. Um, and so some of that stuff is true, but it's not necessarily about a specific instance. It's the idea filling the void, right? So the idea of that you are conspiratorial in your belief, meaning that like you're looking for a different view of reality, What does religion provide? A different view of reality.
Mm.
You're looking for a political ideology. Well, what does that provide you with a different view of reality? Oh, you don't get it, right? That's what people will say. You don't get it. This you're missing out on this. You're not seeing this. And what are they trying to do? Convert you.
Yeah.
No one's gonna right. No one's gonna change religions based on a conversation, and no one's gonna change political parties or whatever based on a conversation. And yet it still happens. And for me, I agree with you completely. It definitely gives people a sense of community, which is the sangha. It
Hmm.
gives people a sense of purpose, which is their own kind of like how we're using enlightenment as a hope or a refuge. They're using I guess, the manifestation of their political willpower as that kind of a thing,
I
and
guess
then
like by the analogy, that's like their dharma.
that's their right. And then the ideology around it all is the teachings. You know what I'm saying?
Unfortunately, it means like Trump is like their Buddha, or
I
whoever figure is going to be like that's going to be the saint like figure for them.
That's going to be the saint-like figure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
If you like
sure.
follow Daniel's doing the three treasures, right?
Yep.
Of Buddhist practice. You have a community, that's the Sangha part, and then you have the truth, which is the Dharma part, right? What the beliefs are, the community,
Hmm.
right? And then you have whoever the figureheads are,
Yep.
right?
And there you have
Yeah.
it. And so you'll
Yeah.
have, a lot of the signs that you'll see up at the rallies and whatnot will be very prophetic in nature, and
Yeah.
unwielding faith towards a human being that probably, you know, shouldn't be had for any particular person because everybody's fallible, and it's not to say that we can't forgive somebody or accept them even with their fallibilities. But it is to say that, the blind leading the blind is not a good way to get to the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't put it in the notes, but as I was thinking about this, this whole question, because what's being said, there was like kind of a unifying belief system. And Jung is saying, look, there should be this myth that should evolve so it can be inclusive. And it just didn't happen, and then maybe these are the things you're going to see in the end. You'll see a belief vacuum, and then things will kind of like rush into the vacuum.
Yeah.
And I think like scientism was part of this, right?
Yep.
It hadn't occurred to me until like today, but when you look at it, like a lot of the people who maybe were going, okay, so maybe it's science is the thing that's going to be our new religion. But that took a weird beating during the pandemic
During
because
COVID, it took a
all,
huge beating.
all over the place.
Yeah. Well, and part of it
That
was
whole
because
saying of like, believe the science, right? Believe the
that was
science,
it.
believe
People
the
said, "Oh,
science.
I follow science," as if to say because they believe that they're talking to somebody who can't read, you know,
Yeah.
and so they're like, "Well, I follow science," and you're like, "Okay, good for you. I'm glad that you follow science." And Eric, you and I have had similar education, went to the same school and whatnot. Like some people actually have studied research, like how research gets done, not just Googled a study that fits your point of view, which, by the way, Google will give you research that will fit your point of view, that will support what
If you
you're.
chat GTP, it'll like give you exactly what you want to hear back,
It'll
right?
exactly give you what you want to hear
Yeah.
back. So the ability to have critical thinking is important, which is why, just kind of looping back to where we kind of started, the idea that you can take that leap of faith and have critical thought and say, the story of some person arising from the dead is a crazy story just in general, right? One that I cannot wrap my rational mind around it. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take that leap of faith and say, I believe that that's happened because this person was a special person. And if I believe that that person was a special person, then I believe in the rest of the story. That's the bridge. That's the bridge to believing in this case, what are we talking about? Like God or divinity or something greater than the material. You know what I'm saying? And so for them, they need that crutch. They need that. And I think most people do. We talked about this last time. I think I mentioned something like, having faith in metaphysical abilities, you know?
Mm, 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 mm.
And that being the crutch, which is why I do like those stories about people flying or making you know pizza for the ages that everybody will remember how good it was. You know,
This guy's what he did with basil, just simple basil and tomatoes.
that was it.
Lord, everybody.
Yeah. You know, but like that gives people something tangible because it's rational but not rational. And that helps people to believe it, to believe more. So I am in the camp that I think mm, spiritual practice is better than not having it, generally speaking. But that being a good person probably affects your day to day more than having a larger spiritual belief or religious belief in general, because at some point it does start to look like a political belief. And there is some research, and I'll have to look at the book. I don't have it. I don't have it memorized, but like the place that we decide these things that's located in our brain are very close to like an emotional center. So at some point, your ability to make decisions moves over there once they get a little bit more deeply ingrained. And so you're not dealing
Oh
in
yeah, there's something about
rationalities.
that. I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah,
it starts to like,
you're not dealing in rationalities. You're not saying, okay, well, these 3 meters are higher than these 2 meters, so therefore this one's greater. It moves over, and you're like, well, what's the ground look like, and what is the, how, who's measuring the thing? You know what I'm saying? And so
yeah,
as you start to move away from that, and you start choosing from a place of emotionality, you're not going to be changed anymore. You're not going to be influenced. And there's nothing wrong with choosing from that place, but I don't know that people have the understanding that they're moving from one side to the other side. And once you kind of move over there, it's very difficult to get out of it because, as they say, science no longer applies here. You know, we're talking out of some place of where we believe to be knowing, and it's not based in religion. It's not based in rationality. It's not based in science. It's not based in anything. It's based on feel, and you cannot convince somebody to not feel things. You know,
yeah.
that's where they're coming from. It's very difficult.
It's an emotional place.
Yeah,
I don't think I
yeah,
really like the amount of splintering that happened though, because as I was like trying to go through the history in my mind, I went, okay, so 9/11 happened, and there was this atheist thing, and it was the rationalists versus the religious people, and that kind
yeah.
of like went along. But it almost seems like it kind of like splintered even more, because then you get
Yes.
people main thing is like to be involved in social causes, which could be noble things, but it has a religiosity to it now, right? People
Yeah.
point to, right? And then you got the Trumpism filling some weird gap, and that's maybe people who are religious, a lot of people who aren't though, but it's its own kind of funny religion. And all this splintering of this. So again, I guess I see in that Jung being prophetic in this way. I suppose the maybe as we get to the end of the episode, maybe I can share one other thing about this. I think connects back to another part of what you were saying, though, which was that for me, when I was deciding to go to do acupuncture, part of what excited me about it was I was like, but this is an entirely different way of looking at the universe.
Sure.
And I was interested in that. And if you could make some needles and some what would seem from a Western medical or Western biological or Western sort of cultural point of view to be just some random spots in the body
Right.
you're just poking, that would actually do shit, really meant that there was a whole nother worldview in place. Now I had already gotten some of we did episodes on extraordinary experiences, and I already had like some experiences that were kind of wild. I had met a guy from Okinawa who could shoot electricity out of his hand.
See? Cool
Like
power.
it was a cool, and it influenced me. I can't say it didn't. It was a cool power. And I think after that, it was like you start meditating, you start realizing I can almost kind of read people's minds and shit. Maybe you could do that anyways beforehand. Like I had situations where like people seem to be able to read each other's minds.
Oh yeah.
That means there's more going on here, right? Even before meditating, that was happening. We all have had those kinds of experiences. There's more to the universe, right? But I thought doing the acupuncture was a very definitive statement because it was like I'm going to put little metal pokers
Right.
in completely random spots, and it's going to fix people's shit.
That's right. It doesn't hurt at all. It
That's
feels
going to
great.
seem crazy. And I had like very sciencey friends. I remember like thinking, okay, part of what I'm trying to make the statement in doing this, because I can do things for crazy reasons like this in part, was that like I think there's another whole way of looking at the world, and I want to do things that demonstrate that to people.
Right.
To show there's more to reality than what you think there is. You're not just a biological robot being defined by the way this culture is telling you how you're supposed to be. You're not. You have other energetic processes going on, and I'll show you through these fucking needles.
Right.
There's more to you. Plus, if we do the needles in certain ways, maybe even we'll tap into deeper parts of your own psyche, or maybe in what we might even call deeper parts of your own spirit. and we'll show that. And that was, I think, the way the extraordinary things kind of help in that sense too. I've had that sense of that as well, right? And that does help you go through and think, okay, maybe there's more to this. That mattered to me. I don't know if you had any, do you have any thoughts like that? I mean, I had thoughts like that going into our field. I was thinking, yeah, I want to prove to people that there's more going on in reality. And I'm going to try to do it through this medicine beyond just like fixing their lumbago, their sore back, or, whatever it is, their GERD or something, the fact that they, you know,
Yes.
have these
Yeah,
physical problems. Yeah.
that's one reason why I like to bring people to Remy and Ashley's place in Mexico. You know, drinking the medicine for sure is one of those times where people can cross the threshold, and really move far, far, far beyond what you believe was possible, to have kind of deep healing and visual and energetic experiences that go beyond explanation, but are yet so intimately personal. You're not just drinking a hallucinogenic, because there would be some overlap at some point. It's the same thing, and yet everybody is drinking the same thing, but everybody's experience is different. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of one of these things. But
But then also like we talked about in previous Jung episodes, I would think the universe will respond too. You'll have synchronicities. You'll have other things
absolutely, yeah,
start to
yeah.
happen. You start realizing, oh, wait a minute, my mind got opened in a new way, and reality is different than what I thought. Yeah.
So before we finish, Eric, I want to ask a question, and then I just see if what we could do, since this is the last episode that we're recording in 2023. Um,
Maybe we'll do it next week, but
maybe
maybe.
we'll
Yeah.
do it next week, but maybe, just in case it's not, just in case it is. We've never done this before, so we'll just give it a shot, right? So looking at it from an anthropological, societal perspective, okay, we see, you mentioned 9/11 as one place of splitting, right? In the culture, psycho emotional culture split between kind of religiosity and then rationality, and in the rationality camp we have science also. Then we have kind of like the 2016 election as another one, and maybe even a little bit before that, already kind of like starting to the fabric is kind of starting to
I feel like
ripple.
the financial crisis ruined capitalism for people.
There we go,
Yeah,
2008,
I mean, like things
2009.
happened that were like big deals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were totally big deals that
Yeah.
kind of left a psychic wound really in people's minds, and economic wounds in this part, in this country. I mean, I don't know if it was all over the world, but I know for here, places that were already kind of shaky took a huge hit.
And like a
And so
loss of faith in the whole idea of it somehow.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll call it hits on faith, right?
Yeah.
And then again, the election, and then the hits on faith went even deeper with people who believed in science as the last truth, the last bastion of truth, right, during the kind of the pandemic. And and so now things are definitely different than when they were, which is always could be the case as time moves forward. But just based on this shift, and I'm not asking anything specific, but if you were using your top hat of Merlin or Nostradamus, where could you imagine that there might be another, shift that would change another bastion of hope that seems to be relatively ubiquitous, or at least held by a large percent of the population?
Yeah. I don't know if I can answer that. Here's my gut answer.
Sure, give me the gut.
Okay. We're doing this podcast.
We
This
are.
podcast is not going to change human culture.
It is not, but it
But
might for some.
I see it as like this is the act of faith. This is the leap of faith. To me, the leap of faith that I kind of believe in is this idea of the the seekers, people who are seeking out something different,
Mm,
creating a new kind of spirituality, a new kind of way of looking at the world. We were talking before the episode started in our kind of pre-episode little combo that we have. It just came up like I'm trying to write my own stages of the path. I'm trying to write my own worldview that seems true for me. I'm writing my own version of tantric Zen Taoist Sufism,
Right.
right? And so to me, I see that is the point of hope, you know? Now, that doesn't answer your question, I know, because we're talking about something that will be much more sweeping and social. But my own kind of personal, like, um, karmic inclinations are not in that direction. I tend to see the cope in the actions of, individual folks, like what we're doing, or maybe people who are listening,
Yeah.
and maybe that's what happens. Now, there is this like little theory. It goes back to this guy. What's his name? His last name is Wilbur. I forget his first name. He talks about this idea. If you can get a certain number of people, like we were talking last week about like the 5
Yeah.
to 10%, if you get 5 to 10% of the people trying to like create something different, it will tend to kind of ripple, you know? Do I think that that can happen in some way where we're all going to like decide that we're all going to believe in the same guru or something? I don't
Right.
even want that, to be honest. I
Right.
think that's played out, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's over. My hope for hope would be that, individual people will resist. Like, one of my favorite things is you just resist the outside and create your own thing, right? And then that will be the magic for the future. So like, that's my answer to it. That
Mm.
isn't trying to see a prophecy, but that's more like, I guess, stating a hope, and at least why I've been trying to do the whole thing I've been doing my whole life, to be honest. That's because of that. And to the extent that hopefully that has an influence beyond just myself, we've done this in different ways. I've tried to do it with students, I've tried to do it with patients. Now we're trying to do this with this podcast, you know, like that's the goal. You just try to like push this idea, right?
Mm.
So I don't think that answers your question, but I mean, it is my gut answer to it.
Okay.
How
That's
about for
fair.
you?
So I can't predict the future, so I don't know that I would. I can only say that large scale events have, they leave marks on society like traumas leave marks on people. The external wounds appear as rule changes and laws, and the internal marks or the internal scars appear as these rifts, away, moving further away. But I think the point that you bring up, so I can't predict what's going to happen. There'll probably be some more financial stuff. There'll probably be some more
Yeah, a
war
bunch of other
type
fucked
things.
up shit's gonna happen.
Right.
Like that, there's gonna be an environmental crisis. It's gonna go shitty.
Yeah.
That probably is gonna happen.
But I
So
think I think that there are not too many bastions that are not tethering a little bit. You know what I'm saying? They're not fraying already,
they're teetering and tearing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
They're not
someone might
totally.
say this is the age of Aquarius,
Oh,
and
yeah.
things are like being kind of pulled apart. I mean, Jung writes about that. He
Yeah.
says moving out of the time of Pisces, the Aeon of Pisces. He wrote a whole book called Aeon about, like, the Jesus. We'll talk about when we talk about Jesus maybe next time,
Yeah.
for people who might
Yeah.
like us in the audience.
Yeah.
The Aeon part, we're moving out of the Pisces thing, which we'll explain what that means next time.
Yeah, next time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And yeah, we're moving into Aquarius, and Aquarius is like a harsh energy in some ways. It's the last shit's gonna fall apart in Aquarius.
But when it does that too, kind of like just adding to your point a little bit, like we end up having the democratization of ideas.
I mean,
You
that's the
know,
positive side of it, right?
right, and that's the positive side of that. So in a true democracy, everybody's input is equal to the others. Obviously, we don't exist in a true democracy and based on money, power, fame, notoriety, and the desire to have all of those things. Not everybody's voices has the same thing, but in our own kind of communities and our own relative realities, if you want to call them that, we can decide to choose things that are not necessarily within what the culture would want or even accept. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what I'm advocating for. Like,
Yeah, and so
we've been
then
doing this thing.
yeah, and that goes towards the podcast that we are offering. It goes towards the work that we are offering in terms of like with patients and whatnot. Somebody I did a breathwork workshop, and I said, give us I like to have everybody do a little introduction. I say, tell me what you'd like to be called, and tell me what you do in life. I don't know. I don't want to know your career. I want to know what you do. What do you do in this lifetime? And when it came around to me, a name that was given to me by Lama Glenn was Osel. And so I said, my name is Osel and I teach meditation
Yeah.
because I believe that to be the greatest tool that I could teach anybody.
See that, like, to the question you're posing, I mean, the one thing I can say for sure for that is that I believe in the fact that we can go through as individual beings, take our own spirits, our own Buddha natures, our original spirits of who we are, Yuan, Shen, if you're my Chinese, and do something with that. That I believe.
Right.
That I can put some money on. So if that's like a nice way to end an episode for me, I think that's the
Yeah.
cap for me.
Yeah. And
That
that,
we can go through and we can be creative spiritual beings and come up with our own ways of living our lives. I think that I believe in. Other stuff I don't, but that I do
yeah.
believe.
Yeah. And then maybe the energy that would normally get put into like shared communal or shared societal beliefs like religion or like science or political whatever, you can take that natural wiring, that natural tendency to want to be in part of a collective, and fold that back in on yourself, actually, and
Mm.
fold that back in on your own development. It's not to say that you can't be involved in those things, because that's an act of compassion on a large scale, which I think is useful. But on the other hand, that the tendency to want to believe or be a part of some kind of spiritual thing, because we are wired in this way, instead of just letting it go and just going, wow, fuck it, that shit's not real. You could take that energy and actually maybe make, as we're using it a lot in this episode, the leap of faith and try, because as you see things are splitting, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be split yourself. Let others be split, but not those few that are going to make the effort to try and find something that, I love to say it, is beyond the obvious.
Well, I mean, like, I think also, and I probably have to like get going in a second, but we can
Yeah.
build partnerships that are of our own design and creation
Right. And new
that are
partnerships.
that are outside of like maybe what the rules might have been previously, but we can do
Yeah.
this. I mean, like, and we have a spiritual partnership
Sure.
that's involved in producing this stuff and that helps some people out. That's cool. You can kind of like form spiritual partnerships in a new way based on something that's much more authentic to how you see the spirituality of the world or something like that, right? You
Yeah.
can do that. Maybe that's the opportunity within this.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe, and I think that fits with what Jung was saying to bring the whole thing around. Like ultimately in the end, like we tap into the archetypal world, we tap into the spiritual world, and we share in a new way that isn't being structured from the outside.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That seems a beautiful way to try to end it, unless you
Yeah, I
have
think
something.
so. I didn't want to end it on a,
Yeah, it's not being a bummer. I think this is the opportunity, right? I think the
Yeah.
opportunity is to build. I mean, that's the whole theme of the show, right? To try to build lives that are spiritually, existentially meaningful to the beats of our own drums
Yes.
in our own way. That's a freedom,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. All right, beautiful. So we pulled it around again.
That's it.
The end of every episode, we pull back to something positive.
Yeah, why not?
It's good. It should be.
That's I
That's
agree.
what I believe in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
sincerely, I can say like I actually literally believe in that. You know? Will it change the whole society? I don't fucking know, but I believe in that we can do, you
But if
know?
society is made up of individuals and we can have influence on ourselves and individuals, and eventually something will happen.
Maybe that 5%, 5 to 10% thing works and things start to shift,
Yeah,
right?
that would be a huge audience if we had 5 to 10% of all the people.
I'm not holding it on that.
But
But
on
other people will be doing their own boogie too. And maybe
That's right.
that
But on that note, we would love to have people share our work with their friends, families, coworkers, enemies, and strangers even. So if you enjoy what we're doing, leave a comment in the YouTube or wherever else you can, on Instagram, something like that. Email us, jinandtantra@gmail.com. And if you are not subscribed on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, please go ahead and hit that sub button. We appreciate it. It does help the algorithm kind of get us to more people. We have been growing a little bit over the last few weeks, and more people see our work, and it's wonderful. And actually, if you're here with us to the end of the video, you are within like the 5% of people that stay to the end of these things. So thank you very much. We do appreciate all the love and all the constructive criticism. We'll take it all and put it in the tantra machine and make a chocolate cake out of it at the end and feast on it as we dance naked around a fire to some random god who does or doesn't exist based on how you believe.
And you can decide for yourself if that deity exists.
That's right. We could also be manic and just having a breakdown, but either way, we're enjoying it with pleasure, as my teacher Andre would say, with pleasure. So with pleasure, Eric, thank you so much for being here. To our audience, thank you for listening. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.